ball field. And so we've been there 10 years and we're still going strong. We have 3 Vista workers this year to help. I spend about half my time developing a garden that grows itself, and the other half dealing with wildlife who want to participate in the consumption of the garden. So it's a place where people can come and learn about gardening, and also people can help grow more food for the local food pantry at OCS. So it's an interesting place to be, and I'm working on making it more beautiful every day. That's about it. If you're interested, please, you can get in touch. We have Facebook, a Facebook page. We also have, you can just get in touch with me. My information is on the Facebook page, or you can just come on down to the garden and visit for a while and you can see what we're doing. Thanks.
Awesome. Great, Peter. Thanks for being here too.
Sure.
All right. Rachel, would you like to go ahead with your presentation?
Sure. Can everyone hear me? Are we good? Okay, I just want to make sure. So let's see, I'm going to share my screen here. Uh-oh. I don't believe it says it won't let me. It was disabled.
Are you a co-host? On Zoom, you have to be a co-host to share.
I know Sarah said that she had beforehand. I don't know if it's with the computer now because we had to do some technical difficulties. Let's see.
Okay, I did make you a co-host and I was able to do share your screen. Give me one sec. Maybe I have to check my other computer. Hang on one sec. Sorry, everyone. Lots of technical difficulties today.
I think it went now. I think we're good. Got it now. Yes. Look at that. Okay. I think hopefully everyone can see it now. Okay. So I'd like to thank Sarah for inviting me out virtually to do this presentation. When people say spring wildlife to me, it made me really excited to talk about this. And it was very hard for me to choose a few things here or there to talk about because there's so much to talk about this time of year, especially with the change in seasons and everything. So I'm happy to be here. I feel great that I get to share some of my knowledge with you. So we'll get started here. And like Sarah said, I'm open. I like conversation. I like talking. So if you have questions throughout it, feel free to ask. If not, you can wait till the very end and we can answer them at the very end. But I prefer open conversation. So just a little bit about myself, just to kind of start off here. I'm a naturalist too with Lorain County MetroParks, and I've been here since 2015. I'm currently located at the French Creek Nature Center in Sheffield Village, if you've been there before. But I also have previous experience at the Carlisle Visitor Center. As you can see in the top photo, that's me holding one of the barred owls at the Raptor Center. But then I also have worked at the Cuyahoga Valley National Park as well as Cleveland MetroParks. So I'm a Cleveland born and raised. And have slowly migrated west. I currently live in Vermilion with my husband, but it's very hard for me to leave Ohio because I have family, friends, they're all here. I studied recreation and leisure studies at the University of Toledo for 4 years, and then moved back home. But my love for the outdoors came from my dad, who basically took me to parks on a regular basis, the whole family. And the Cuyahoga Valley National Park is my all-time favorite park. I visit there frequently. Aside from being a naturalist, I'm also a certified kayak, canoe, and stand-up paddleboard instructor. And I have experience working with several native wildlife animals, Ohio animals, as you saw with the barred owl, the Raptor Center, but we also house reptiles, amphibians, and fish here at the Nature Center. In my free time, I live, eat, and breathe being a naturalist. I'm outside most of the time. I'm a hiker, I'm a runner, I'm a bicycler, I'm a tent camper, native plant gardener. So my backyard's pretty much nothing but natives. And I do like wildlife and landscape photography as a kind of a side hobby. But my favorite places to visit, we go to Hocking Hills regularly, Acadia National Park and Yellowstone National Park, which we just visited last August. So whenever we go on vacation, it's usually to a national park or some sort of national park. So a little bit about LCMP, so we abbreviate it, Lorain County MetroParks. The parks were created in 1957 by the Lorain County Probate Court. And as of 2021, LCMP has over 9,000 acres, 22 parks, and 140 miles of trails, and that includes waterways, because we, as like French Creek, we're situated on the French Creek along with the Black River, and then Vermilion has the Vermilion River out there as well. We are here to preserve, create diverse ecosystems, provide educational and recreational opportunities, and conservation, as well as we strive to offer community programs such as this to everyone countywide. Every major city in this county has a Lorain County Metro Park, so most of us are not far at all from a park to visit. A variety of topics, all that stuff, including spring wildlife. So that's a little bit of the background of the parks. We'll get started. So as I said, I'm an avid photographer. These are all my photos. But I really, truly love animals and nature. And you know, these are just some of the tastes of some of the things I can get to, but springtime is one of my favorites because everything is in bloom, everything starts becoming colorful and active. Not that I don't like the other seasons, but there's a lot of different varieties of animals that start popping up this time of year. And I'm gonna have a lot of information on these slides. I know it's being recorded, so go back and watch again if you desire. Don't feel like you have to read everything. I know some people are visual learners, some people like to read as well. So I'm covering very basic things here because there's so much that we can talk about. But as you can see, top left over, that's a wood anemone, which is a spring wildflower. We have a cecropia moth on my hand next to that, very giant moth. Painted turtles, a golden crowned kinglet, garter snake, a spotted salamander, and a cute little fox kit that was part of a den last year in one of our parks. So many varieties of animals this time of year. So we'll start with my favorite topic. So spring and early summer wildflowers. I like to tell people on my hikes, because I'll do birding hikes, but birds tend to not sit still for me and it frustrates me, whereas wildflowers are right there and I can take photos up close and they won't move anywhere, except maybe when it's windy. But I'm still practicing my birds, but my wildflowers are one of my favorite things. So I'm going to kind of highlight a few of the ones that you might have seen already or will see coming up. Since we're getting kind of into May, spring, wildflower season has kind of slowly started to end and we're getting into summer. But a lot of these flowers, you know, and I'll have a link, you can buy these and they are good for all pollinators in gardens. And they're small, but they definitely make a giant impact when you can plant them in certain places, especially gardens. So why do they bloom so early? So with that time of year, so we're talking like late February, early May-ish in this time of year. But that early time, melting winter snows increase the soil temperatures which begins to change from winter to spring in the forest. So about 50% of the sunlight reaches the floor, stimulating all of the growth with the lack of tree canopy. So spring wildflowers are basically the first color that we have that time of year. And so why are they important to the ecosystem? So their emergence actually coincides with early spring pollinators. So they co-evolved together over hundreds of years to bloom and then awake at the same time. So it provides food, shelter, water for flies, bumblebees, ants, small little insects that start waking up in the spring. These pollinators in turn, of course, transfer pollen from flower to flower and initiate seed dispersal, helping to move the flowers along the forest floor. So the 3 flowers in these photos, all are spring wildflowers. You have a little fly on the bloodroot, a bee or bumblebee on the Virginia bluebells, and then the spring beauty has a wasp on it, which actually was taken earlier this spring. So as you can see, they definitely utilize that with the early awakening of the plants. So that's kind of like their history together and why these flowers are going at the same time. These insects are waking up at the same time. So what attracts them? Because, you know, that time of year, they got to look for something. So the petals of the flowers actually attract them. These little lines on here are called nectar guides. And it directs them kind of like an airport runway lights straight to the middle of the flower, where of course the sweet nectar is at, and in turn the pollen. They do take pollen for food as well as the nectar. Pollen feeds the young insects as they're getting ready to lay eggs. But it also gets transferred on a lot of the insects inadvertently as they're moving. So a bumblebee, an example, they're furry and fuzzy. So they actually get a lot of pollen on their body as they move through the flower. And then the little bluettes at the bottom, you kind of see like a bullseye yellow right in the middle of that blue. So insects, especially bees, see in different colors than us. So when they see these, this is more of an ultraviolet light showing those guides and directing them to those flower centers, what they're looking for. And of course, the other thing is smells. Most of the spring wildflowers have smells, not all of them, but this one is an example. If anyone knows what this interesting looking, this is a wildflower. This is called skunk cabbage. We'll talk about that a little bit, but this one actually smells like rotting flesh. Sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Rotting flesh, which actually attracts flies. So this one it's unique looking, but it also has that smell, which is not your normal flower smell. So like I said, we're going to go from March to May, June. Some of these, if you haven't seen them already, they probably have already kind of passed. Like I said, we're kind of leaning toward more summer. But just for next year and for your gardening planting purposes for the following year, it's a fun way to plan ahead to see what kind of things you might want to add to your garden for next year. Some terms you might hear me say. Native means the plants have been here as part of a balance of nature hundreds of thousands of years before the European settlement. So these are ones that have grown here, have been here, and not introduced. And then non-native means it was introduced with human help, intentionally or by accident, because that happens quite often. If it was not previously found there, it's technically non-native, but not all of them are invasive. So when we say non-native, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to take over a place or habitat and cause problems. So most of the time, the non-native ones, they cannot reproduce because, or spread without our help. Then you get to the invasives. Invasive is both non-native and able to establish and grow quickly and spread to the point of disrupting our native plant communities. We'll get to invasive plant species a little bit later in this presentation. But this is another one where it can crowd out spring wildflowers that we'll be talking about. And the last one is ephemeral, which means it's very short-lived. So some of these flowers bloom for a short period of time. Example would be bluebells. They only last about a week or two. Very beautiful if you can get a chance to see them, but they go pretty quickly. So some of them are ephemeral, some of them last a little bit longer, but if you hear me use that, that means they're very short-lived. So we'll start off with the skunk cabbage. So this is pretty much gone and past. This is not one, unless you have a very wet area in your backyard, probably not something you'll see other than in our parks at wetlands. They are a thermogenic wildflower, which means it will produce heat and actually melt snow and ice. It's pretty remarkable. So they'll be up in February when there's snow on the ground. It's got this maroon spathe, which is that kind of hood-like leaf. And then it's surrounded by a little knob in the middle. If you guys can see that kind of alien-like looking thing in the middle of it. As it matures, it opens and allows more of the pollinators and carrion beetles to enter where they like that smell of the rotting meat. It gets its name from the bad odor. And the leaves are huge. It's kind of like if you see a whole area of them and then the leaves come out later on, it's kind of like something out of Jurassic Park. I've seen leaves bigger than my head. But you break apart the leaves and it also smells skunky. And then of course you find it in soil, soggy soil, spring-fed wooded wetlands. So not perfect for a garden, but it definitely is one that you'd see if you were hiking in our wetland areas in the parks. This is one of my favorite. This is kind of like when spring is here. So spring beauties, and actually they're probably still blooming. I did see a few out the other day. So these definitely are longer lived, but they do open up early March, mid-March. You can find them in wooded sites, pastures, lawns. I have some in my lawn myself. I make sure my husband does not mow over them until they're done blooming. I'm very strict on that. But you see these patches and these purple pink flowers, and they're quite spectacular all together. They're very small, but when you're looking for them and you see them all at once, they're really pretty. So they actually grow underground like small potato, the tubers, and they actually have a sweet chestnut flavor that indigenous people and colonists use for food. I don't know how much they had to harvest for them to eat, but they definitely are plentiful and they definitely taste like that chestnut flavor. One fun thing about this, it actually closes at night and it'll reopen in the morning time when the sun is out. So they not only open early, but they efficiently use their energy when the sun is out and when it's not. So most of these will close when the sun is not shining. So they're definitely efficient plants. And this is a very important source of nectar, as you saw in the first photo with the wasp, for small native bees and flies early on in the summer. This one is cutleaf toothworth. This one's done blooming, but a lot with these flowers, the flowers bloom and the leaves do persist after the fact. There's only a handful of them that the leaves will disappear. But they get their name from the tooth leaves, as you can see, very prominent. The flowers are sometimes purple, and they bloom at the top of the stem, so right up top. They grow in rich woods and they're tolerant of some disturbed areas. I've only seen a handful of patches here, but I do know it exists elsewhere too. This one is a true ephemeral, which means it only is up for a little bit just to reproduce and then go dormant, except, for the leaves. This one is one that is affected by garlic mustard. I'm sure you probably heard of garlic mustard. We'll talk about that. But it's displaced this one especially because it grows in the same habitat along with others. So a lot of times you'll find cutleaf toothworth. You also maybe find garlic mustard in the same area. Wild leeks. If any of you like the flavor of onion and garlic, wild leeks are also known as ramps, spring onion, ransom wood leek, and wild garlic. You break these leaves apart, they do smell. They actually have in Peninsula, Ohio, out in the national park, they have an entire festival dedicated to this plant called Ramp It Up. And other places also have that festival as well. So it's closely related to onion, garlic, the shallot, scallion, and chive. There's a bulb underneath the ground, but the leaves, you can dry the leaves up. And I've actually had chocolate covered sweets with dried up ramp in the chocolate. It's actually pretty cool. It's sweet and salty. But the stem itself has a deep purple or burgundy tint to it. And they all grow together in colonies, so it's easy to kind of tell them with the flat leaves, unlike the wild onion with the skinny leaves that you see early in the spring. But this one's definitely something you can tell a difference between. They're edible, of course, just like a scallion. and green onion, and tracked various kinds of bees with their flowers, sweat bees, mass bees, honey bees, and these are what the flowers look like. They'll start blooming actually soon. They kind of look like little aliens coming out of the ground, little hands. But they're really cool to see, and they're definitely odd if they're all in one area. So that's what'll attract the bees this time of year. I'm not 100% sure if they smell the same as the leaves do. I'm assuming they do, but I've only ever seen a handful of them as I've been hiking. So those are wild leeks. This is one of my favorites. This is bloodroot. So this is pretty much done. I missed it this year, which I was very upset about. It bloomed and was gone. So it is a true ephemeral. Basically the petals last for a day or two, if even. The leaf itself, as you can see, is a very unique leaf. There's only one. It wraps the flower as it's coming up, and then it expands to reveal that white flower with the petals. The name derives from the orange red juices inside the roots. It has been used as a dye. And some of these plants, early on have been used for a lot of medicinal purposes, Native Americans, early settlers, and then passed on through generations. Medical treatments have been used for asthma, fevers, lung conditions, and laryngitis. And then an alkaloid from the plant, sanguarine, if I pronounce that correctly, used commercially in mouthwash and toothpaste. So some of your mouthwash and toothpaste might actually have a little bit of bloodroot in it. So like I said, this one's very pretty. This one also grows in big groups. They tend to do that because ants will disperse their seeds, and ants dispersing their seeds mean they spread it. They take that seed to their colony, end up eating it's called a lysome. It's a fleshy patch on the outside of the seed that tastes good to the ants, and the ants will eat it, but then they leave the seed behind, don't go very far, and then they grow more bloodroot. So they tend to be in colonies all together. So there's that. And I threw a tree in here because I'm sure many of you have probably seen this along the freeway or in parks. Eastern redbud. It's a really pretty tree, and actually lasted a lot longer this year, which was really nice because usually it's one of those that only go for like a week or two as well. It's a great tree to have in your yard, but it's one of the first trees to bloom in the spring. Pinkish, reddish, purple flowers all over, and I mean all over. Like this is like now on the end, it's all over twigs, branches, even the trunk. They'll come out of nowhere. They flower first, and then as you see, the leaves kind of resemble a heart, so it's a really pretty happy tree there. You'll find them scattered in small populations in open woods. They prefer moist and loamy soil. I've seen a few of them in Vermilion River Reservation. I do also see them kind of along the freeway as I go into work. But the white-tailed deer browse the foliage and the twigs in the spring and summer. Squirrels will eat the buds and bark, and songbirds eat the seeds, and the pollinators enjoy the sweet nectar and pollen. So it's kind of a universal tree when it comes to native wildlife. And of course, we can enjoy it too. You can actually eat the flowers right off the trees, and they have a very slight, sweet, tart flavor to them. I also know people have made jam out of the buds, but I have not tried it myself personally, at least not yet. But I know people who have tried it and they enjoy it. So a good tree to have, very pretty. Definitely beneficial to wildlife. This one's unique. This one is called Dutchman's breeches or breeches. The chief pollinators of these are bumblebees because they're the only ones that can actually spread apart the petals to get on the inside to where the pollen's at. And then the seeds are dispersed by ants. They look like, if you've seen the photo, they do look like upside down birches hanging from a clothesline. This one is very unique to its habitat, fairly well-drained soils, wooded habitats. I do know it grows in backyards, though. I've seen it there depending on what you have habitat-wise. And it looks similar to another wildflower called squirrel corn, which if anyone has seen this, that's what it looks like. That's squirrel corn. But that looks more like a heart. It kind of hangs upside down. It's not hanging out, it's more up. But you have to definitely look at them to determine which one's what. You can also see squirrel corn has more of a purplish tint, whereas the Dutchman's breeches has the yellow to it. This is one of my favorites too. This is the trout lily. So this one's just finished late April. Wildflower season was a little bit late this year, which was nice. they kind of happened all at once, and then it's kind of prolonged a little bit. But others may have heard it called dogtooth violet, fawn lily, or yellow adder's tongue because of the way the fruit looks when it is done blooming. Reason it's called the trout lily is because if you can see the leaves, it's kind of mottled brown with green. It looks like the underside of a trout or a brook trout, which is a native fish to this area. Now, you got to be patient with this one if you decide to plant anything, because it does take 5 to 7 years for it to mature and bloom. You'll see a lot of young leaves, but the flowers are few and far in between. So you kind of have to wait for that and be patient. And then the inside, the maroon stamens where the pollen is at, you'll see those as the petals kind of open their way out. They grow in rich soil habitats, and there's actually another one, a white version called the white trout lily, which I did find in French Creek this year. I've seen it Black River. I've seen it in some of our parks. Same kind of other names, dogtooth violet, but the white trout lily is also very pretty. Same color leaves too. And then I don't have much on this one other than showing you multiple different types of violets. We do have several species. I'm sure most of you have probably seen the blue violet. We have the downy yellow, common white striped, and long spurred. And then there's way more. These are just ones that I typically see. I have the white ones, white striped, in my yard, but the blue violets definitely make appearances all throughout the trails and the parks. But another one that you can eat, I do know the blue violet makes a very good jam and jellies, but these are host to a lot of butterfly or fritillary caterpillars, and they eat the leaves and the flowers, and it's a host to them. So more of a shelter, more or less, than getting the pollen from it, or the nectar from it. So these, not only are they, the food and water source when it rains on the droplets on the plants, but it also is a great shelter for a lot of these small insects who don't necessarily have that safety just yet, and the plants are not fully grown. So most of these are pretty much done. I've seen a couple spotted here and there, but they're very pretty. And this one is, I know this one's pretty much still blooming. This is Jack in the Pulpit. If anyone's seen this, it's a very odd looking flower. It resembles a pitcher plant. However, there's not any liquid in the inside, where as the ones in the Amazon, the insect goes down, gets trapped in liquid, and then is digested. This one actually is just attracting the flowers, and there's a little stem in the middle, and that's where the flowers come out. They're very small, but you got that maroon spathe coming over, kind of like the skunk cabbage. The fruit then eventually turns into this bright red grouping of berries. Good for animals, not for us. It actually will cause burning sensation or worse if ingested, so I'd say stay away from the brightly colored berries. It's found in a variety of woodland habitats. We have plenty here for you guys to see, and it's also pollinated by small flies. So this is not one where it's going to be bees. This is more or less the flies. But yeah, that you'll definitely start seeing that bright red berries start showing up in the woods. Golden ragwort. So this one, I should still be blooming. I'm not 100%, but we're still in May, so we're good to see that. It's got basal leaves, you see at the top, more rounded than garlic mustard, which we'll see in a little bit. But it reaches 3 feet tall, yellow lemon color, and this forms colonies as well. Classic example of a composite flower family where all of the leaves or flowers are at the top of the stem. And they're packed into these tight discs. They look a little bit like buttercups, but you can definitely tell the difference. They are a favorite of spring pollinators called Leconte's hapola moth. The caterpillars eat the leaves, and of course then the moths use the nectar or eat the nectar off of the flower. And these can be found in woodlands and roadsides. A lot of times you'll see them along the roadsides. One of my favorites, again, I have a lot of favorites if you can't tell, Virginia bluebells. If you've ever been out to Vermilion River Reservation mid-April or so, the entire forest floor is covered in these. They're very beautiful, and it's just a sea of blue. So they're one of our showiest and most vibrant colored wildflowers. The flowers actually begin out as pink, and then they'll turn to blue. And I have seen white ones as well. There's just, a different genetic makeup of those flowers at that time. Sizable colonies, low-lying damp woodland, floodplains. My husband and I planted a few of these this year in our backyard. Right now they're not going to bloom, but the leaves will still take, and then hopefully next year we do get some of the bluebells. These are dependent on long-tongued bees to pollinate, as well as butterflies, moths, and even a hummingbird. The ruby-throated hummingbird will visit the flowers. So they have a very deep channel where the nectar is at. And then, of course, the large colonies will provide excellent cover for many of the forest floor wildlife that scurry among their leaves, because the leaves do persist after the fact. So they may not be blooming anymore, but they definitely, the leaves are still there. And then the trilliums. So we have large flower sessile trillium, or we call the sessile one toadshade sometimes, and then drooping trillium. So these three are pretty much almost done, if not done. But the large flowers actually are state wildflower for Ohio. But they do get rather large. And of course, once again, colonies of these, take over an area, and you definitely get some color, especially with the large flower trillium. So wild blue phlox, this one is, I know for sure, blooming in French Creek right now if you've hiked behind our nature center. But any of the areas that are low-lying by creeks, this is very showy, just like the Virginia bluebells. Blue, purple tinged flowers. This one is, once again, long-tongued insects. So if you have a variety of these wildflowers, you're going to get a variety of native pollinators, because this one, phlox, is more of the long-tongued, whereas the spring beauties are very small, capable of just animals or the insects to sit on them. But this one, you definitely need select pollinators for it. Constant procession of butterflies, as you see two of our native swallowtails below, the black swallowtail, and the other one's a tiger swallowtail. They're not out right now, but they will be soon. But they definitely are attracted to this phlox. Dame's rocket, which is also blooming now. We'll talk about that, an invasive species, non-native plant. It's in the mustard family, but it's often confused with phlox because it blooms around the same time. Wild geranium. This one is still blooming. Not very large, very purple, very pretty. Another important source for native pollinators. This one's fun. This one actually has a unique way of spreading it. Their seeds. So their seeds are packed into a little pod, and it actually resembles like a crane's bill, so that's its nickname. But as the pods dry, eventually it catapults the seeds out, and then a little tail-like structure will respond to the humidity, and it'll help them drive the seed into the soil for it to germinate. So these seeds have a very unique way of spreading them, not only by other animals, but on their own. It's a self-seeder. So wild geranium. And this one I do know I've seen in people's yards. I have it. Unfortunately, the rabbits have eaten it, and I haven't gotten flowers yet. So hopefully one day I will get them. Wild ginger. So this one grows through creeping rhizomes underneath the ground. Paired leaves, look like kidney-shaped leaves. And then the flower with this one, you have to look on the ground because it grows out of the rootstock at the bottom of the forest floor. They believed it was fly pollinated at one time. However, there was no odor like skunk cabbage, so they most likely think it was self-pollinated. And then early settlers, Native Americans, used it as a spice, hence its name. So that's where we get the ginger from that we have. May apples, or I like to call them tiny umbrellas. The kids love this one because they scatter all over the ground just like most of these flowers do. So this one actually spends more time investing in vegetation instead of attracting pollinators. So they are looking to, the ones that are native bees, but they are looking to create their fruit. And the fruit looks like this. If you can see one before all the animals eat it, because deer will eat this up like candy. But also eastern box turtles, which actually play an important role in their seed dispersal. And then the slant line moth also blends into the flower and will spend a lot of time resting in the flowers. It's kind of like if anyone has a yucca plant, the yucca moth will live inside there. And in the early morning, you can go out and look inside the blooms when they bloom, and there's little moth, like white moths, yucca moths in there. So they utilize their camouflage within these flowers. Bluettes, this is another one. They're very, very, very small, but it's kind of like the spring beauties. If you have a large drift of them, you'll see blue, and it's beautiful. I talked about those the yellow bullseye in the middle that attracts the pollinators to the center. Little fun fact, the wildflower sometimes is called Quaker ladies, which derives from the shape of the flower, or the shape of the flower, which looked like the hats regularly worn by women of Quaker faith. It also resembled the blue color of their dresses that some of them wore. So if you ever hear them called Quaker ladies, that's what they're referring to as the bluettes. Wild strawberry. Most of you guys are gardeners or learning about being gardeners. So this wild strawberry is not the ones you have in your garden, but it is actually the one that is hybridized with a Chilean strawberry, which gets us the strawberry of commercial fame that we all eat. So just like the one you grow or cultivate, these ones still get the red flowers with the seeds on the outside. Most of the time they're gone by the time you see them though, because the animals eat those as well. And fun fact, the average person in the United States will consume nearly 8 pounds of strawberries. So I will say I love strawberries and I have them in my fridge all the time. So that's, definitely one of those fruits. So no wonder the animals eat them so much and so quickly. They're on the end of their blooming period at this point, but I know there's still some out there. And then the last one here, blue-eye grass. This one we're starting to get into summer wildflowers. So it actually while it has grass in its name, it's actually related to irises. The grass is very short, but it can blend in with the prairie. It's self-seeding, so they'll drop their seeds at the end and spread around. And then the flowers attract butterflies and hummingbirds. Deer do not prefer this plant though, and they tend to leave it alone. So if you want deer-resistant plants, blue-eye grass, I do know is for sale at nurseries. I have 3 or 4 plants in my backyard. And the flowers are very small, but they're very pretty. So I know you guys have probably talked about native before, but why buy these? Where can you buy them? Planting native, it saves time and it's lower maintenance. There's a reason I do perennial planting because it's very basic, just watering once they're planted. It saves on the water because they're best suited for this climate. No fertilizers or pesticides, and it's great for controlling erosion, filtering stormwater, and great for Ohio rain gardens. I have some links in here. Sarah, I'll email all of those to you tomorrow morning so you can share with everybody about that. But Native Plant Month has a whole list of native nurseries to buy from, and I also have gotten stuff from Prairie Moon Nursery, which is a website that they'll ship the flowers and seeds to you. Okay. So I'll kind of briefly go over invasive plants. I have a lot of information on these slides, but I'm just going to do it because I don't want to go over our time and I want to get to the animals because that's fun. And invasive plants are not nice. So what are they? We talked about them. They're both non-native. They're able to establish on sites and grow quickly and disrupt communities, plant communities. They crowd out native spring wildflowers. Their rapid growth, high reproduction rates, and lack of natural control is what basically they outcompete everything else. They will take over. There's 3,000 species of plants, about 25%. Fewer than 100 are known to be problems, which is a good number compared to how many we have. But they can destroy habitat if you let them go unchecked. Garlic mustard is definitely number one. Right now it does have a white flower on it, so it is blooming. The first year they're small and little basal round leaves, and then you see the second year they get the white flower and they get more of an arrow-shaped leaf. The long green capsules, once they brown and mature, it's really hard to pull them. And if the seeds get in the ground, they're viable for 10 years. So it's a very sturdy plant, very strong. Best way to remove it, hand pulling them. We pull them in the parks here. We have programs. We go out and pull and we throw them right in the trash. Now, while it may sound bad, they actually do, the leaves make a great pesto. I have heard several people, instead of throwing them away, they'll take the leaves and create a pesto of that, and it's good. It is in the mustard family, so it does have some taste to it. But if you don't want it there, throw it away, put it in the trash, get it out of there. This was the other one that I mentioned early on with the phlox, the Dame's Rocket, which is blooming right now. It was introduced as in ornamental landscapes. But the difference between the phlox and the Dame's Rocket is the phlox will have 4 petals with alternating leaves, whereas the phlox has 5 petals with opposite leaves. It gets its name from the seeds in the little seed pods. Once they produce hundreds of them, they're rocketed out of the seed capsules and spread like wildfire. So this one, you have to pull it out, dig it, spray it. And then, you can pull them and cut back, but you got to get them out of there, throw them away. Because if they're anywhere near once that fruit ripens and the seeds can spread, you're kind of doomed. Autumn olive, this one you probably have seen along roadsides, especially freeways. As the wind blows, the underside of the leaf is very shiny. And there are berries too, but right now the leaves are shiny. And you can tell the difference between these trees and the trees along the freeway. This was native to China, Japan. Up until recently, it was recommended for wildlife planting in windbreaks, but it spread faster than they thought it would. And it outcompetes native plants. Prolific fruit producers and birds will eat them and spread the seeds. Now the berries, though, I have heard also make a very good jelly jam. People have used them to eat. They are delicious, but that's about the benefit that they have around here. Removal with these, any woody plants, you got to cut them, you got to spray them. It's a lot of extra work. So I just tend to say, if you see this anywhere, they shouldn't be selling it, but if you see it, just don't buy it. Don't plant it. Don't put it in. It saves a lot of spreading with that. So it's autumn olive. This is a lot on here, but honeysuckles, which I'm sure you've probably seen in some of our parks. We have a lot of it here at French Creek. It was introduced once again as, they thought it was beneficial, and then it ended up turning into a wild spreader everywhere. They're considered bush honeysuckles, so the amur, the maros, and the tantarean. And what happens is you can tell which ones are non-native. Most plants non-native, they'll leaf out sooner, they'll have green leaves way early when other trees are not growing leaves. So that's how you can tell what's native and non-native. We do have 2 native bush honeysuckles, but they're very few and far in between. Most of them are non-native honeysuckles. The fruit is abundant, rich in carbs, but it lacks what our migrating birds need. So the more these are out, the birds aren't getting what they need. It's going to be a huge impact on migrating bird populations. So removal, another same thing as autumn olive. You got to cut it, you got to spray it. You can try to mow it down, but it's just not. Sometimes it's not as effective. But you can see they look all kind of the same. I have a hard time telling them apart. Except for the tantarean. I mean, that one is pretty, you got the pink flowers, but the yellow one or the white ones, yeah, no way. I've tried. But one way, the non-natives do have a hollow stem, whereas the natives have a full stem too. So if you want to cut it, you can look at it, but that's one way to tell the difference between them. This one is one of my mortal enemies. This is the tree of heaven. This was another one that they thought would be beautiful as a nursery tree, but for successional disturbed forest areas, this thing takes over and it will spread. As you can see, a mature female tree produces as many as 350,000 leaves, and they're wind dispersed, so it's really hard for humans to control it. And they're also transported by water and birds. As you can see, they kind of look like sumac. Staghorn sumac is native, so we want to keep that. But the one difference, and you'll see on the inside of the invasive, the tree of heaven, there's a little notch at the bottom of the leaf, whereas the staghorn sumac has a bunch of ridges on it, and it's serrated. So that's one of the main identification keys that you can see by looking at it. If you want to get up close to it, it has a smell of a burnt nut or rancid peanut butter. So if you want to rub the leaves and just tell the difference, that's definitely going to be your determining factor, is that smell. And I've seen small trees, I've seen large trees. This one is once again, a woody plant. You got to cut it. You can get rid of the little small trees earlier on, but you got to get every part of the plant, including the roots. So tree of heaven. This one's very pretty, even though it is invasive, purple loosestrife. There is a native species, but it's not as common as purple loosestrife. It was valued as a medicinal herb and ornamental, but unfortunately it got out and spreads quickly. This one you can't pull. It's got a huge taproot. I've tried, I've fallen backwards trying to get it out. But it's a very thick taproot and they get pretty tall. So it blooms from June to September, so it's going to start showing up in wetlands, along rivers, but I've seen it on the freeways. I've seen it alongside of that. The cool thing about this one is that there is a beetle that will actually only eat that plant. So they have raised the beetles and will put them on the loosestrife, and it will actually eat the loosestrife. Not as effective. It's more effective for smaller populations than larger ones, but it was a way to combat it, and still is. And the last quick one here, Japanese barberry, which most of you've probably seen this because they still do sell it at nurseries, probably against what they should. It was a replacement for the common barberry, which hosted a black stem rust, which was a pest to grains, but the Japanese did not. However, it did escape cultivation and invades forest. It's got thorns on it. It's not fun. You got to cut the whole thing down. But high level of seed production enables it to penetrate natural habitats and outcompetes desiring shrubs and herbaceous plants. Once again, this one, small plants can be pulled, but you know, it's best if you can, you know, get it out as soon as possible, but you have to cut it back and you have to, you know, mowing is ineffective for this guy. So here's some information on invasive species. Once again, I'll send these links out and everything to people, but so just so you guys know, there is a list. Ohio Invasive Plant Council is probably the best website in our area, but also ODNR and then USDA. And they have a list too for alternative plants. So if you're like, I see this plant, what else can I plant that's native? They have a list for you guys to look through and to choose a different one that you can find. Okay, the last category, spring wildlife. So this is the time of year too where everything kind of starts waking up. Birds are moving through. This right here is a beautiful bluebird that was taken at Vermilion River Reservation. And actually not all bluebirds leave, some bluebirds do stay. But this one is part of the kind of the time of year where everything's coming through into the area. So I do have some sounds on here. So if you hear it a little, if you hear a bird, that's why. So this is a red-winged blackbird. This one is definitely one that you probably have heard or seen so far this year. It is the another sign of spring. The male has the black coloring to it with the red and yellow underwing. And then you see the female to the left, it's got more of a spotty design, and that allows them to blend in better on the nest. They actually make their nest in cattails. So their preferred habitat is wetlands, eat a lot of insects, seeds, all of that. Seeds are more during the winter time. Insects are definitely what their main source of food is. If you've ever been hiking around these guys, they will get very defensive during breeding season. I have been dive bombed by them several times at different parks. So, you know, definitely this time of year, keep an eye. They're not going to hurt you, you know, but they'll definitely dive bomb you if they feel like they're being threatened or their nest is being threatened. So just a heads up. They roost in flocks, so they're blackbirds, just like crows and starlings. They'll flock in smaller numbers in the summer and then larger in the winter, and they can get up to like 1 million birds. And if you don't know what their call is, you've probably heard this in wetlands. And of course, the male's the only one that makes the noise in the songbird. One of my favorites birds that come back, tree swallows. They're a familiar sight in summer fields, and as you can see, the boxes that they're sitting on are just like the bluebird boxes. That's because they are. They'll also nest in bluebird boxes, which is, so if you don't get bluebirds, you don't have the habitat for them, you may have a habitat for the tree swallows. They got this really deep blue, iridescent backs, clean white fronts, and they're beautiful aerialists. They are like planes flying over a field, grabbing any insect possible. They nest in tree cavities, just like the boxes, but they eat mayflies, they eat damselflies. So if any of you live by the lake and you get the midges and the mayflies, that's their main source of food. So when those insects are coming out of out of their larva stage, they're all about these, so that's their food source. But as you can see, they have a list of other insects as well. And here's their call. More of a chirping. That's a cardinal in the background. I couldn't get just the sound. Baltimore Orioles, which recently I get a pair in my backyard every year. It's basically my alarm this time of year. But they got their name. They're black and orange plumage. Their name came from the heraldic crest of the England-Baltimore family. But you should see the female is actually yellow, whereas the male is the bright orange and black. They're found in deciduous forest, but they prefer to be more open areas instead of like a very heavily crowded. These are ones you can attract in your backyard with ripe fruit like oranges. If you put the oranges out, you can also put sugar water as well as natural jelly. Not a lot of it though, because if you put too much, sometimes the bird gets caught up in the jelly and then it gets on their wings and it's not fun for them at all. So you can put a little bit of the natural jelly, and that's just the natural jelly you get at Giant Eagle or any grocery store. And it can attract them. I'm not saying 100% it will, but it can. As for your plants, if you have bright fruits, nectar bearing flowers like raspberries, crab apples, they're attracted to that as well. And then I do have their call. Let's see if this will go through. I have that one on there. But... So it's a little bit more of a high chirp, but of course it's the male that calls, and a lot of times the male is very overbearing, and you hear that over in other birds. I won't name all of these, but I wanted to make a point to say, spring migration it's a big time of year where these birds are passing through. So these are all warblers, very pretty birds, definitely a showstoppers when they come through Ohio. If anyone's been out to McGee Marsh or Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge out west, they have the biggest week in American birding, and these are like the superstars. They move around very quickly. They're hard to get photos. These are not my photos. I wish they were, but they're definitely very pretty in different sizes and shapes. And then your backyard birds. So most of these are probably some you have seen. And if you have bird feeders, certain websites will tell you what seeds are best, what feeders are best. But those are some common birds that you probably have seen. The top corner with the one that's highlighted in red is actually a house sparrow, which I know most of us have seen. The house sparrow, though, unfortunately, is a non-native invasive species. It will crowd out other birds. It will go in their nest. It will destroy their nest. It will break the eggs. So if you can avoid attracting them to your yard, it's beneficial to have more of the native birds there than those house sparrows. So I'll kind of go through mammals. We all know deer, white-tailed deer, and the reason I bring up white-tailed deer is more because of the fact that their babies are going to come out this time of year, and a lot of people, go up to them, they see them, they want to bother them, they think it's abandoned. Just please know that spring wildlife, most of the time, especially fawns, these fawns are not abandoned. They do it, the mothers do it on purpose so that they protect their young. They're born without a scent. The mother stays away so that they don't get smell, like the smell attracts them or to them. But as you can see the difference in coloration between the two, deer give birth to 1 or 2, sometimes 1 to 3. So there's no wonder there's a population problem. We have a lot of them. But it's usually May or June this time of year when they start coming out. So, adult deer are very fast. They can also swim, which if anyone did not know that, they can swim. But yeah, this time of year is definitely spring wildlife time of year. Raccoons. I'm sure either you love them or you hate them. It depends on what your situation is. But you can tell they have, that mask around their eyes, the ringtail. They're very smart. They use their nimble fingers and hands. They actually wash their food, and that's how they feel their food. But they're very skillful, very capable of moving things. They actually can open doors. And if they got the chance, they can reach into a pocket and pull a penny or a dime out of your pocket. They're very smart animals, and I'm sure most of you have probably seen how smart they can be, especially with trash cans and potentially places in your yard. And they're, you know, the mother will keep the young will stay with the mother through fall or winter. So they're ones that don't just let them go off on their own right away. Rabbits, which I'm sure if you have gardens, this is one that you've seen frequently. I've seen them in my backyard, but they do prefer grasses, weeds areas, but of course they'll be in suburban areas. They're great prey for hawks and owls, even though they're excellent escapees. They zigzag, but if you see them in your yard, if you see the animals, the prey, it's not a bad thing. That means they're just eating the food and they're eating things that you don't want them to eat your food yourself. So they nest in shallow depressions in the grass with dry grasses and fur. So of course, if you're mowing, always keep an eye out for them. But they can have up to 5 litters between, in the springtime, and that's why there's so many of them. Yeah, they eat dandelions, clovers. I saw the few in my backyard mowing down some dandelions the other day, which was great. But then I mowed them and then they didn't show up again, which was also good because I don't want them eating my plants. So yeah, the eastern cottontail, of course, cottontail tail, definitely noticeable. Groundhog is another one. These guys are actually true hibernators, so that's probably why you haven't seen them. You won't start seeing them until soon. If not, they're already out. They actually can lower their temperature all the way down from 97 degrees and then they to about 40 or so, and then their heart rate drops from 100 beats per minute to 4. So they are fully asleep in the wintertime, and that is why we have Puxatawny Phil to tell us whether or not we will have early spring or not, because they are the true hibernators. But they dig burrows. I know they can be pests in backyards. They'll dig holes, but they are a member of the squirrel family. I have seen them climb trees, which is quite remarkable to see a giant groundhog climb a tree. But they're the largest member of the squirrel family. And they do have a really high-pitched whistle called whistle pigs is another name for them, or woodchucks. Eastern chipmunk. This is a pest of mine in my backyard, as cute as they are. They do not hibernate, but they will keep stores of food and burrows and snacks in the wintertime for them to eat. They cache a huge number of seeds, and sometimes they forget about them and they plant trees and plants themselves, kind of like squirrels do with acorns. They also can climb trees. As you can see, they also climb up to bird feeders. I caught that one looking at me through the window at work, eating my seeds. So they'll climb up onto seeds and eat those. Our feeders eat the seeds. But you can tell they're very small. They have the long tail, but they have the stripe going down the back, the black and white stripes. And a group of chipmunks is called a scurry. Some insects for you. So this is the morning cloak. This is a butterfly, very beautiful. It's one of the longest living butterflies that we have. They can live up to 10 months because the adults actually overwinter. So they'll hide in trees, in the crevices of trees over the winter and hibernate in there until it's time for them to come out in the spring. You can plant birches, willows, elms, hackberries, and they prefer to eat that or be on their host plants. They usually don't visit flowers. They actually feed on decomposing fruit or scat. They get the minerals from there, as do other butterflies. Excuse me. The common eastern bumblebee. So this one you've probably definitely seen recently, especially if you have flowers already. They are the teddy bears of the bee world. They're very fuzzy, black hairs all over their body, but then they have that yellow thorax, which is characteristic of that. Most of the time, these bees are not going to sting you or bother you unless you bother them. They actually sometimes in the early morning when it's cold, they'll be laying on flowers, look like they're sleeping. They're kind of subdued, and you can actually kind of go ahead and you can pet them a little bit. They're very fuzzy. But they're social insects. They have colonies up to 300 to 500 individuals. And they do something really cool called buzz pollination. They actually land on the flower, they shake their wings, they vibrate their wings, and then they shake off the pollen onto their body. So it releases the flower's pollen, kind of like a salt shaker releasing salt, which is pretty cool. But they're one of the earlier pollinators of this time of year. Reptiles, we got a painted turtle. You've probably seen these starting to come out along the canals or stream sides. They are ones to be basking in the sun by the hundreds on logs. They eat mostly plants, aquatic plants, but they'll also eat insects and crustaceans. They're probably the most abundant turtle you're going to find. And you can see that they get their name because they're kind of painted. It looks like someone took a paintbrush to them. The males are smaller than the females, but they have longer claws so that they can use those as they're digging or swimming. And then they produce about 4 to 15 offspring. With turtles, though, of course, they, once they lay the eggs, they leave, and the young are on their own completely. They don't come back. So it's kind of ingrained in their brain that they're time to do something else in springtime. I only put one snake in here, so I apologize if any of you are not a fan of snakes, but this one I know is common in gardens. So the garter snake is the most common snake you've probably seen. Usually it's got those 3 lines going up and down, but you can see between the 2 pictures, it's the same species. They're just different colorations. So they can have, green, shades of green, brown, blue, just depends on the snake's makeup. You can find them in grasslands, edges of ponds, lakes, streams, rivers. And then, of course, as you're seeing, a lot of times you'll encounter them as you're weeding or planting. But if you can tolerate them, they actually do you guys a favor. They'll eat worms and slugs, insects, and small mammals that may be feasting on your garden plants or flowers. So if you see them, it's not a bad thing to leave them there. Most of the time they'll go hide, they'll go somewhere else. Okay, we got a spring peeper, so a couple of amphibians here just to round out the wildlife. This one's probably not calling anymore, but it's one of the first to come out in the spring. They're only, despite the picture, they're only about the size of your thumb. They're not very big, but they make a very loud call, so you might have heard this before. So they wake up in March and April. They like vernal pools, so that's the snow melt. That's where they lay their eggs. They have toe pads, they help them climb, but most of the time they stay on the forest floor. So it's not a bird you're hearing, that's a frog. And they eat beetles, insects, flies, spiders. So all those early spring pollinators are their food. The toad, which I know most have seen in gardens, smooth, bumpy skin. The 2 large warts behind their eyes are actually holding a toxin that can be released and captured. If a predator captures them, it makes them taste bad. So they're technically poisonous. They congregate in large numbers, so you probably hear them in the parks. Female can lay up to 12,000 eggs in a long strand in the water. So they definitely lay a lot of eggs. They're very beneficial. They'll eat 3,000 insects in a month. In addition to that, it includes earthworms and slugs. And as most amphibians, they actually don't drink water, but they absorb it through their skin. Some amphibians also breathe through their skin. So if you have a clean source of water in your backyard, it's perfect for them to sit in and to cool off. This is what they sound like. Definitely very high pitched. Like a cricket. Gray tree frog, which is more of a summertime frog, which you'll probably start hearing soon. Same thing, smooth, bumpy skin. They don't need the vernal pools to survive, but you'll hear them in the woodlands and urban areas. Large numbers again, if they can find a breeding pond. But so this is what they sound like. So you probably have heard that in the summertime. Of course, they got that grayish green color. And I just realized that the information on this slide was from the last one. You hear that in the middle of the night, it's not a bird, or an insect, it's actually a frog. And then my last little guy, which I'm sure you might have seen, because I've done this before when I have pulled up rocks or I have been in a garden, a native garden. I pull this little thing out underneath a rock and it looks like a worm, but it actually has little tiny legs. This is the eastern redback salamander, name indicative of what it looks like. It's got the red back to it. It's a lungless salamander, so this is the one that breathes air through its skin. There's 2 phases. You get the lead gray and the red back, but they both have the speckled underbelly. They're found throughout the state, the leaf litter, especially where it floods. They don't migrate. So spotted salamanders, I showed you way in the beginning, they actually do migrate to their vernal pool every year. This one's entirely land dwelling, and it actually goes through transformation inside its eggs. So it'll go from gill breathing to lungless breathing in its egg under the ground. And their egg clusters look like little clusters of grapes underneath logs. So what this all comes down to, a lot of information I know I'm going over, so thank you for bearing with me. The importance of gardens that you guys have put together, not only your vegetables or any, plant garden, vegetables, fruit, but any garden of any sort. Wild animals and plants lose their natural homes due to road construction, houses, and factories. I mean, habitat destruction is widespread, and it becomes an impact on these animals. So any garden that you make, however small it is, even for the tiniest ones like the salamanders and the toads, is perfect for them. Best way to encourage it is to give them a place where they can feed, rest, and produce their young. And here's some examples of what you can have in a wildlife garden. Native trees, flower beds, pond, any sort of water source. Compost piles are great for worms, of course, but also for other insects. Bird boxes, dead wood, so wood piles, if you can leave them there, leave them. Snakes, anything will like to live under them. Messy leaves. I know we want to rake our leaves at the end of the fall, but a lot of those butterflies or moths will actually overwinter in the leaf litter. So I don't really clean mine up until the springtime. Same goes for dead stems on flowers like coneflower or rudbeckia, which is black-eyed Susans. I leave those on all through the fall because songbirds will eat those seeds off of there. And then I cut them back in the spring. They may look a little scruffy, but it is beneficial for those native species. One other thing you can do too, and you can get more information for the National Wildlife Federation, is you can actually certify your garden if it meets all the criteria that they have on their list. So it's a certified wildlife habitat. Like I said, there's all that's on there, but you can read more through the website that they have. But food, water, cover, sustainable practices, and a place to raise their young is beneficial to them. Here are some resources. Ohio Department of Natural Resources has some great species index guides online. You can also get little books like this. This is their tree book, but it's very beneficial to have. We use these on hikes a lot because it's got really up close pictures. They're free resources. You can get so many every so often, but those are great. They have one for every group. If you ever have injured or wildlife inquiries, you can go on our website. We don't take wildlife in, our permits do not allow it. But if you ever happen to find an injured or abandoned animal, Lake Erie Nature and Science Center in Bay Village is a great resource to call them to see what they can do for you. And then of course, ODNR likes wildlife reporting, so you can report certain sightings that you see. They have a list on that website of ones that they specifically look for that you can report. Are there any questions? I know there was a lot of information.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I have some questions for you, if that's okay.
That's fine, yeah.
I've been taking a lot of notes.
Oh.
Okay, so I have my first question is, somebody recently told me that the praying mantis feeds on monarch butterflies, and I wanted to get your opinion and your knowledge to see if that is true.
So there is an invasive species of praying mantis called a Chinese mantis. I can't differentiate between the two. However, they are known to prey on butterflies. So I would not be surprised if that mantis would go after a monarch if it had the opportunity. I know that people post, because I follow a lot of Facebook groups that are wildlife related, and a lot of them post the egg casings, and I just say, if you find the egg casings, don't bring them inside because they hatch a bunch of little praying mantises. And B, I would, if you can get rid of them out of your garden, I would do it. While they are beneficial to eat some pest insects, I find that there's other insects that are more beneficial because those definitely will go after the larger butterflies.
Got it. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna go back to this computer. But that makes me sad because I just saw, I have so many little casings of the of the praying mantises, and I saw tons of praying mantises in the People's Garden last year. And one of our like interns just saw like a tiny praying mantis, which looks so cool.
Yeah.
But you would suggest taking those casings or like those little cocoons, I guess, out of the garden, and try to incorporate some other bugs that will eat some of the pests.
If you can, yeah. I can't say all of them are bad because there are native praying mantises, so don't feel like you have to remove them all. I just know that is, you know, if you haven't seen them attacking the butterflies to begin with, then they might be okay. I also think the monarchs, they're pretty smart, and not only that, monarchs eating the milkweed actually makes them taste bad. So the mantises more or less will probably go after something else instead of, you know, going after the monarchs. They should know otherwise. So I can't say completely, but maybe if you have like an overabundance of them, you might want to spread them out a bit, so they're not all congregating within your garden.
Oh, okay. Thanks. That makes sense. Did somebody else have a question? I think I saw a hand raised too.
A couple.
Yeah, I can go on. What's the coyote population in the county like? And are we getting any of those coy wolves yet? Or and also I've read on social
I think she froze.
media that some people think that they're, I don't oh, sorry.
No, you're good. I think I got you back. It's doing something weird.
Am I back now?
Yeah, you're there. I got the coyote part, and then you said something about social media.
On social media, also there's people report seeing bears or mountain lions. They worry that that's around. I wondered how real that was.
So to answer your question about the coyotes, the population, we have a population. I can't say that it's a healthy one. It's not going to be to the point where it's like deer where they're everywhere. And as coyotes can be scary to people with pet owners and other animals, a lot of times it's the interaction between the humans and the coyotes that cause the issues with the pets and the other animals that they have. So I have not, in the parks, we look at the ecology of the animal. The animal is very good for pest population control, like rabbits and squirrels and chipmunks. If they're coming around your yard or anything that makes them seem like they're scary or they're going to do something, it's most likely because someone is either keeping food outside for like stray cats and attracting them, or the pet, it's mating season and breeding season, and the pets are threats to the animal. Most of the time though, coyotes, if they're portrayed in the news like they are, that's an isolated incident. Most of the time the coyotes are doing their thing as they should. They're wild animals. Coy, as the coy wolf or the coy dog, I've only heard of reports of that in certain urban areas around here. I have not seen anything but coyotes that we're aware of. And I also have not heard anything about the breeding between the two. So at this point, I'd say anything that you do see that's coyote, it would be a coyote. And then with the mountain lions and the bobcats, once again, those are only like certain areas. I've seen the bobcat sightings in Summit County MetroParks. Mountain lions, I don't know if people see things unless there's proof of that. I don't believe that they're here. It comes down to, is there proof of it? And most of the time, if it's like a bobcat, the bobcats, they're coming through at the nighttime. They're on their own. They're not really going to bother humans. They have no desire to, especially when they're out at night. They prefer to be by themselves. In Lorain County, though, I have not heard of reports of either of those animals in the area. But once again, you know, people see things and you're not 100% sure on what they are either. So
Thanks.
you're welcome.
So I have a question. Thanks for your talk, by the way. It was really good.
You're welcome.
It's just fun to, you know, talk about these things and
Sure.
learn more. My question is about possums. I have only heard sort of good things about them and that they eat lots of ticks, yet people shoot them and all sorts of things. I mean, and you didn't mention them, so I just wanted to know what you had to say about possums.
I only didn't mention them because people see them, but not everyone sees them, and it's one of those that, you know, I had so little time for so many things I could talk about.
No,
Yeah. With possums, so they do eat ticks, very beneficial. Another good thing about a possum is that they actually, people think they get rabies because they get put in the same category as raccoons and animals that do. However, they don't. They have a very low core body temperature that actually doesn't allow them to contract rabies. So when people see them, they look at that as the problem. And then they also look at it as their defense mechanism. They stand there, stare at you, and open their mouth with sharp teeth. So unfortunately, it's a misconception. They're once again beneficial for insects, but they also they'll eat mice, they'll eat other small rodents. So I've always looked at even raccoons, as much as they get into things, as long as you're taking precautions to prevent them getting into certain places like netting or, you know, chimney coverings, I think possums are very beneficial to pest control and everything like that. So it's more or less of your perception of that animal. Same thing with coyotes. Coyotes are the same way.
Right.
If you look at them beneficially, then yes. What it comes down to is how are they interacting with us humans? What are we doing that we could change that to make it seem less of a problem? I hope that answered your question.
Yep.
Okay. I think Peter had a question.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm putting in a pollinator garden in my regular garden, and I put up a mason bee house because they suggested that. But I'm really interested in the kinds of flowers to put in there. I know you mentioned all the native wildlife flowers, but they're fairly fleeting and you know,
Yeah.
they're not around very long. So if you had any recommendations, I know butterfly, which is basically a monarch milkweed, is always a good flower to put into a pollinator garden.
Yeah.
Any other
So
suggestions?
yeah, I mean, I could do a whole nother presentation on summer wildflowers. So for me, like in my backyard, I have purple coneflower, I have black-eyed Susans. Any milkweed is good, butterfly weed, common milkweed, swamp milkweed. If you get blazing star is another really good one. The blue-eye grass is a beneficial summertime, and it does last a little bit. Trying to think what else I have in my yard. That is spiderwort is a good one that lasts. I'm trying to think of other ones. There's a lot of the summer ones actually in nurseries are some of them are native. So you know those flowers that you can see there, especially the black-eyed Susans and the purple coneflower, are beneficial to those bees. It gives them a good flower head for them to sit on and to gather pollen and nectar. I also have cardinal flower, which is another, it's pretty red, but it does attract some of those longer tongue bees. I think that's a good list. But yeah. I have my email below on the screen too. If you feel like you want to send me an email, I can give you more of a list off the top of my head. Right now, that's what I've got. But there is a plethora of summer ones that will persist from June through September or July through September, that would be perfect for those bees.
Great. I'll give you an email.
Yeah,
Thanks.
you're welcome.
I will add that goldenrod and asters are #1 in terms of the species around here, according to nativeplantfinders.com.
And I do have goldenrod in my backyard, and that definitely attracts a lot of bees. So that's another good one too.
Rachel, do you have any tips for transplanting trout lily?
Yeah, that's one of those with trout lily, very, very carefully. So a lot of our spring ephemerals, it's always good if you can to try to start them from seed. I know it will take some time with those, especially trout lily, but it's kind of the same with any of your other plants. If you can get the root ball, get enough soil around it, and move them, they should be okay. I'm kind of seeing how my bluebells do, because that was a new experiment this year for me. But like common milkweed is one where it's good to start from seed. So if you can start it from seed, and or if you can get the plants from a nursery like Prairie Moon Nursery, a lot of times that will that'll be easier on you than probably trying to transplant it. But I have not yet done the trout lily before, so that would be interesting. If you do that, let me know.
Will do. Yeah. I noticed I tried to transplant some of them, and I'm trying to do more of like just a native area, especially in the garden on the north side of the garden, very shaded out there, and they did not do well. They did not transplant well.
Okay. Well, I'll see if I can find some more information for you. I can see if I can send that along to you. Because I've had people ask me about that as well. I usually, like I said, I tend to start them if you can from seed, or if you get a small plant from one of the nurseries, it's probably a better way to do it than the mature way to, taking them from the soil, moving them.
Okay, makes sense.
So I have another question if you have a second. Or there's somebody else.
Go ahead, Linda. I was just going to ask something else too.
I'll be quick. Obviously, native plants are better because they're feeding native species, insects, birds, etc. Do ornamentals that are non-invasive serve any purpose?
I think, as long as they have, if they have any sort of flower or, like lilac, lilac's it's not native, it's cultivated. Lilac's a great beneficial plant for, a lot of animals. So I look at it as long as you're not buying those invasive plants, which most of the time in Ohio, they can't even sell them to begin with, it's illegal. But like the Japanese barberry, if you can find something else that's alternative, ornamentals, yes, definitely serve a purpose. They're just a little bit more to maintain. But those animals will still go toward the pollen and still go toward the flowers and fruit on there for them to eat.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think I just have one more. So when we were talking about invasives, is it best to try to get rid of them when the seed head is kind of fully emerged so that they won't have the seed dispersal? Or does any kind of invasive have its own particular way of the like eradication method? Or is it kind of standard, all invasives best to just kind of get rid of them when they've got the seeds on them?
If you can get rid of any of those before they go to seed, because a lot of those, such as the garlic mustard, the Dame's Rocket, once those seeds are viable, even if you pull them, they will spread. So if you can learn, I know I showed them as a mature plant, but like the garlic mustard, if you can find them early on as a year one plant or a very small sapling and can pull them as soon as possible without the seeds, even without the flowers, that is a better way of controlling the spread of that plant than waiting for it to go to seed. So like garlic mustard, we pull that as soon as we see it or if we can. Once it starts flowering, it gets a little bit more viable. And then once it goes to seed, it's kind of like, you know, game over, because the seeds will spread once you pull it. So if you can spearhead it as soon as possible, by learning what they look like when they're young, then that's going to benefit you quicker than waiting for it to go to seed.
Okay, makes sense too. I think you also mentioned like there's like a specific bug or ant, I think you said, that like tackles one of the invasives that you were talking about before. Trying to remember which one it was.
It's the purple
loosestrife. Yeah. So that is so cool. Are there other kinds of like ways to get rid of the invasives, like with those natural methods, or like were those beetles bred to basically get rid of those invasive plants?
So yes, once they discovered that was something that ate that plant, it's bred specifically. So our natural resources program here at the park will actually raise the beetles themselves and then send them out, put them out on the purple loosestrife to eat them. So it's not more or less something that we can do ourselves. It's more of practices through natural resource groups within the park districts and other organizations. As far as other natural remedies, unfortunately, a lot of the things are either get the entire plant that you can, or if they're large enough, such as the autumn olive, you have to cut them, and then you do have to spray the stems. We do use very low, we use not pesticides. We use the things that are herbicides that are safe for the environment, that can be put on those invasive species to combat them that way if they've gotten out of control. One flower called lesser celandine, if you've ever been to Vermilion River Reservation early spring, these pretty yellow flowers carpet the ground. Unfortunately, that's an invasive species called lesser celandine. You can dig them out in small populations, but you have to spray them. It's really one of the few ways that will combat that. So as much as I like to say there's natural ways to get rid of these things, unfortunately, other than that beetle for the purple loosestrife, I haven't really heard much else of other than pulling and spraying.
Got it. Cool. The beetle is really cool. I love the idea of the beetle just attacking that. Yeah.
Oh,
Cool.
sorry. I have one quick more question. Evening primrose. I bought some from a local person, and I thought they were native, and it seems like they might be, but then you also read that they're invasive and bad, and I'm like, evening primrose.
I look at evening primrose, it may be more of a non-native than invasive, but if it is, it may just be the location it's put in. I've only seen evening primrose as a wildflower here. I've never seen it spread like Dame's Rocket or garlic mustard to become, in my mind, invasive. So I would think that if you had it in your yard and it doesn't take over anything, that it would be okay. I put that on my wildflower list every year. Like, that's something I see, and I think it's a good plant. But most of the time it may be non-native, and then someone may have written it wrong where they associate the word invasive with it.
What I read actually is people saying that it just spreads like crazy and takes over everything and never planted, but also these people were in southern states, and I wasn't sure if that was the difference.
It all depends on location too. So like some species that we have here native are actually invasive in other states. So it really comes down to what is on that list that they say on the Ohio Invasive Plant Council or ODNR, that is, or USDA, that can't be sold here or planted here or distributed. But like I said, I've seen evening primrose outside throughout the parks, and it doesn't take over. I see like single or plants or so, not full grown like those Dame's Rocket patches that I've seen. So
super.
I think you're safe.
Does anybody have any other questions? Right. Well, Rachel, thank you so much again for being here, and apologize again for the technical difficulties.
No,
But
it's
I
okay.
learned so much. I'm so excited to go walking around. And can you tell us a little bit too about, is there some more Metro Park kind of activities, or what are some things that are going on with the Metro Parks now?
Sure. So we do have, I have my link down there for the main website for the parks. You can go to our programs page. We have several programs going on, and fortunately now we've been able to open it up to more people. We do hikes. We're currently doing our hiking stick program, which goes through June 30th. You can actually do that either with self-guide. You could either go on a hike with a naturalist and get it signed, or you can actually do it self-guided. So on the honor system. So all of that information is on our website, but you basically hike 6 different parks, you do 10 different hikes, and if you do it all before June 30th, you get a hiking stick. And then for those who've done the program, actually get a little badge to add to the stick after the fact. So that's something we've got going on. And then French Creek is also, we house a theater here. So we actually have a summer theater series going on. All of the theater shows are going to be outside. So that's, once again, everything is on the website. But yeah, programs, we've tried to amp up a lot of that stuff now that it's getting warm because we can be outside. So yeah, that's kind of the highlights of what we've got going on right now. But all that information's on there. All of our trail maps you can find under our parks to find trails to hike. And of course, like I said to anybody, if you have any questions, my email's down there. Sarah has my email. So if you have any more questions, just shoot me an email and I will get back to you.
Great, thanks. I can also include those websites and other things that you mentioned in the follow-up email. So yeah, definitely some information will be sent out to everyone participating tonight.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for having me. I know I went over a little bit, but I hope it was beneficial. I was a lot of information, but hopefully you can go back and rewatch it if you need to get some more. Kind of hit the highlights. But yeah, like I said, anything else you guys need, let me know. I have a lot of, if I don't know the answer, I have a lot of great resources here at the park. So
great, cool. All right. Have a good evening, everyone. And thank you again, Rachel.
Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome.